Hi, and welcome to episode 78 of Toke Signals TV, where we bring you the biggest in cannabis and hemp news stories every week. I'm Steve Elliott, the host at TokeSignals.com, and I'll be guiding you through the news. First, let's take a look at our Toke Signals Bud Pick of the Week. This is some White Russian flower here. It's a 70% sativa hybrid, and it is quite tasty indeed, as you might guess. Let's do the news now, shall we? In Nevada this week, big news. Marijuana legalization will appear on the November 2016 ballot. It's a done deal. The Nevada legislature elected to let voters decide in November 2016 whether to end marijuana prohibition and regulate marijuana like alcohol. They had until March 14th to enact initiative petition number 1. But they chose to adjourn without voting on it. They were tasked with considering the measure after supporters submitted nearly twice the number of signatures needed to qualify for the Nevada ballot. Voters will now have the opportunity to end marijuana prohibition next year and replace it with a policy that actually makes sense, according to Mason Tvert, Director of Communications at the Marijuana Policy Project. Regulating marijuana like alcohol will make Nevada safer by replacing the underground marijuana market with a tightly controlled system of licensed businesses. Law enforcement officials will be able to spend their time addressing more serious crimes, and adults will no longer be punished simply for using marijuana, Tvert said. This initiative makes private possession of up to an ounce of marijuana legal for adults 21 years of age and older. It will remain illegal to use marijuana in public or to drive while impaired by marijuana. The Nevada Department of Taxation will be responsible for regulating and licensing marijuana retail stores, cultivation facilities, manufacturing facilities, testing facilities, and distributors. Local governments will be able to control where they are located. A 15% excise tax will be applied to wholesale marijuana sales, such as those from a cultivation facility to a retail store. And retail sales will be subject to general state and local sales taxes. All revenue from that 15% excise tax will be deposited in the distributive school account, which funds K-12 education in Nevada. This initiative will create significant new sources of funding for Nevada schools, according to Mason Tvert. Marijuana sales that are currently taking place in the underground market are generating revenue for cartels. In a regulated market, marijuana sales will generate revenue for students, he said. Voters in 4 states have already adopted laws that regulate and tax marijuana similarly to alcohol. 2 of them, Colorado and Washington, have established regulated systems of marijuana cultivation and sales. Alaska and Oregon are in the process of implementing similar systems. In Massachusetts this week, the legislature considered repealing cannabis prohibition. The Associated Press reported on the introduction of H. 1561 in the Massachusetts legislature. This bill would legalize recreational cannabis consumption and sales. Bay State Repeal, the ballot initiative committee aiming to draft the least restrictive citizen initiative repealing marijuana prohibition in 2016, is pleased 15 legislators are seriously considering marijuana law reform, that organization announced in a Wednesday press release. We are also pleased the bill permits home cultivation in any amount, as long as minors have no access to the cultivation site and there is no intent to sell, the statement reads. For Bay State Repeal, the right to grow cannabis at home is a key provision of any meaningful reform, both as a matter of civil rights and protection from overzealous law enforcement and as a check on excessive prices. We are less pleased to see that the proposed law creates a cannabis commission to regulate cultivation and commerce in marijuana for profit, the release reads. A new bureaucracy is a waste of taxpayer dollars and a mandate for over-regulation. A better solution is to assign any needed licensing authority to the Department of Revenue. In addition, the proposed tax on recreational cannabis is excessive and becomes more so over the first 4 years. These points are related, the statement reads. A major aim of legalization is to limit access to minors by driving out the black market. But inevitably, unlicensed producers will continue to supply consumers at the black market if legal marijuana is more expensive. In the interest of public safety, then, it is important to rein in several factors that increase the price of legal marijuana over the black market offerings. Number 1, excessive taxation. 2, excessive fees. 3, expensive to comply with Byzantine mandates. 4, prohibiting home cultivation. And 5, licensing only a few retail outlets, thus inviting price fixing and corruption. Bay State repeal appreciates the legislature's attention, but hopes any law passed, whether by the legislature with the approval of Governor Baker, or more likely by the people, gives no advantage to the black market, the statement concludes. In the U.S. this week, an interesting statement from former New Mexico Governor Gary Johnson. He called Washington State's pot rules a worst-case scenario. That's right, former two-term New Mexico Governor Gary Johnson, who's now CEO of a marijuana company, on Sunday told an audience of cannabis industry professionals that voters, not politicians, are behind the legalization movement. And he called Washington State's troubled implementation of Legalization Initiative I-502 a worst-case scenario. Johnson, a vocal advocate of legalization and former presidential candidate who plans to run again next year, gave the keynote speech at the Oregon Medical Marijuana Business Conference. About 750 people were there, according to the organizers. Johnson is CEO of Cannabis Sativa, a publicly traded company which produces marijuana-infused products. Now, when it comes to Washington's botched implementation of flawed Legalization Initiative I-502, Johnson was very critical of the overtaxation of cannabis in that model. How are they going to regulate it and make it a legal product? They have screwed it up as bad as they possibly can, Johnson said. They have taxed it to the level where if you were a prior user of marijuana, prior to it being legal in Washington, you were still consuming it on the black market because of how expensive it is. It's the worst case scenario, and they have it playing out in Washington State. Pay attention to how you are taxing it, Johnson said. You are moving the entire industry from a black market. Johnson also pointed out that Washington State's use of the per se 5 nanogram per milliliter of blood in cannabis DUI cases is flawed. We should be scared to death of people on the highways impaired. But in the case of marijuana, be aware that presently we don't test for impairment, he told the Oregonian. We simply test for the presence of marijuana. The presidential candidate is also smart enough to see through the scare headlines regarding children and marijuana-infused edible products. Are kids consuming edibles? No, they are not, Johnson said. They are really not. It's just made up. It's just a baloney topic. It doesn't happen. Parents take care of their marijuana stash. When asked which state has the best marijuana, Johnson answered, no matter what state you were in, and that is where the best weed is produced. The best weed is produced at that very spot, no matter where you are, no exception. In Virginia this week, a school suspended an 11-year-old for a leaf that wasn't marijuana. An 11-year-old sixth grader in Virginia was suspended from school for 364 days after being caught with a leaf that wasn't even pot. This happened last September to the son of Bedford County residents Bruce and Linda Bays. Their son was enrolled in the Gifted and Talented program at Bedford Middle School. Months after the fact, the couple learned that the leaf wasn't marijuana. A prosecutor dropped a juvenile court charge because the pot leaf had field tested negative 3 times. The boy finally got to return to a different school, separate from his friends and peers, on Monday, under strict probation. But the events of the past 6 months have wreaked havoc on the formerly happy-go-lucky boy's psyche, according to his parents. They say he's withdrawn socially and is now under the care of a pediatric psychiatrist for panic attacks and depression. The terms of his suspension letter state that he'll be searched for drugs at the beginning and end of every school day until his probation is over. The couple, both of whom are school teachers, have filed a federal lawsuit against Bedford County Schools and the Bedford County Sheriff's Office. It refers to their son only by his initials, RMB. Essentially, they kicked him out of school for something they couldn't prove he did, said Roanoke attorney Melvin Williams, who represents the Bays. Their suit, which alleges Bedford Middle School Assistant Principal Brian Wilson and School Operations Chief Frederick McDuis, violated the boys' due process rights under the U.S. Constitution. It also accuses the Bedford County Sheriff's Office of malicious prosecution because Deputy M.M. Callahan, a school resource officer, filed marijuana possession charges against the boy despite field tests that indicated otherwise. The field test came back not inconclusive but negative, Williams said, yet she went to a magistrate and swore he possessed marijuana at school. The lawsuit filed February 3rd in U.S. District Court in Lynchburg doesn't ask for specific damages. We intend to see what a jury would say about that, Williams said. The school system's lawyer, Salem attorney Jim Ginn, who is also representing the sheriff's office, has moved to dismiss the suit because he claims that under the school board's anti-drug policies, it may not even matter whether the leaf was actually marijuana or not. The harm that the Bedford School District inflicted on this boy is far greater than any harm he could have incurred by eating an actual marijuana leaf, or even smoking it, or even smoking a dozen leaves, wrote Christopher Ingraham at the Washington Post. And in New Jersey this week, we have a governor refusing to help suffering children with medical marijuana. Charming guy, huh? Governor Chris Christie's cold-hearted refusal to allow sick children in his state safe access to medical marijuana was the subject of a blistering editorial in Monday's Star Ledger. The issue of edible marijuana in New Jersey comes down to an irrefutable premise. The governor of this state has had numerous chances to liberate children from suffering over the last 18 months, yet he has chosen not to do it, wrote the Star Ledger editorial board. Chris Christie seems content to live with this disgrace, the board wrote. At one time, he summoned the audacity by looking into the faces of inconsolable parents and chirping the dim bulb refrain, "It's complicated." And now he merely dismisses a law that he signed himself and hopes that nobody notices. The op-ed unsparingly points out that 2 years after Vivian Wilson's parents were forced to move to Colorado for the sake of their toddler's health, there is still no workable edible marijuana program for New Jersey's needlessly suffering children because Christie's administration doesn't prioritize compassion. In the interim, the governor has even refused to allow parents to bring edibles in from other states to reduce their children's suffering, the board wrote. And then, with callous arrogance, he accused the legislature of using sick children as an excuse to legalize recreational marijuana use. Because in this administration, pain is a tolerable side effect in the partisan laboratory where they spend most of the time weighing political implications, the op-ed bitterly concluded. In Washington state, we have an unusual situation. A 10-person team is selling marijuana for city government. Just a few days after it opened, the nation's only government-run marijuana shop was running low on weed. Open for just a few days, manager Robin Ligon, 36, was frantically trying to restock. "If I don't get this order in this morning, we're going to be out for the weekend," Ligon fretted. Someone joked about a typical government operation always running late. But this government store is far from typical. This store, the Cannabis Corner in North Bonneville, Washington, deep in the Columbia River Gorge, sells dozens of strains of marijuana along with pot-infused cookies and coffee, glass bongs, and rolling papers. And the store does all of this at the direction of the North Bonneville Public Development Authority, making the city government dependent on this once illegal drug for cash flow. Ligon managed a Bed Bath & Beyond in a previous job, but now she leads a team of 10 city employees trained to sell marijuana. These days she's placing orders for Blue Magoo, Purple Kush, and Pineapple Express. "I can't believe this is my life," she said. Selling marijuana for non-medical purposes was illegal everywhere in the United States just 2 years ago, with cannabis prohibition stretching from coast to coast. In 2015, 4 states and the District of Columbia are setting up legal marijuana marketplaces, open to anyone 21 or older. Tightly regulated marijuana stores began appearing in Washington and Colorado last year. Alaska and Oregon plan to open pot stores next year. This November, activists hope to put legalization on the ballot in at least 5 more states. Nevada, where the measure is already qualified for the ballot, along with California, Arizona, Massachusetts, and Maine. "I've been surprised at how quickly things are moving," said Bill Piper, National Affairs Director for the Drug Policy Alliance. "It's day and night from 2009, agreed Dan Riffle, Chief Lobbyist for the Marijuana Policy Project. Riffle added that doors on Capitol Hill that were once closed to him are now wide open. Still, neither Piper nor Riffle saw the government-run Cannabis Corner coming. That's something that would have been anathema 6 or 7 years ago, Riffle said. Marijuana still carries the threat of jail time in 38 states. Even in Washington state, where voters chose to nominally legalize weed under the anemic, problem-plagued Initiative 502, more than 90 of 281 incorporated municipalities have banned pot shops or enacted moratoriums. But in North Bonneville, a town of 1,000 residents, they were struggling financially, and the potential profit was hard to resist. A pot shop could draw tourists to North Bonneville, and making it government-run would keep that cash local. Mayor Don Stevens, 58, and his former Marine, he got behind this idea. See, Don had joined NORML back in 1970s Oregon, believing that legalization was just around the corner. 40 years later, it's finally happening, the mayor said. It's been a long, strange trip, as they say. Cannabis Corner sits at the edge of town in a renovated storage barn. Classic rock is playing quietly inside, and glass display cases line 2 walls. They carry varieties of marijuana ranged by indica to sativa, with hybrids in between. The marijuana sells by the gram in prepackaged bags, $15 to $18 a gram. Mayor Stevens dropped by the store in his I Pot Leaf Washington t-shirt, fresh from a meeting of the County Chamber of Commerce, where the Cannabis Corner is a new member. Ligon filled him in. I just placed our next re-up order, she said. We're almost out of weed. How great is that? The beaming mayor responded. Since the city couldn't run the shop directly, it set up a public development authority, taking out $260,000 in high-interest loans to get the store started. The 5-member board is responsible for business decisions and doling out store profits. Mayor Stevens' first priority is renovating the town's old playground. The bud tenders at Cannabis Corner are all regular government employees with benefits, and the starting pay is $11 an hour. The board voted to offer the staff marijuana and bongs at bargain price, just above cost, after Ligon lobbied for a steep employee discount. We need to be doing constant trial and testing, she said. Workers at Cannabis Corner take the same drug test the town gives all employees, but they're allowed and expected to test positive for marijuana. And back to Nevada, where a lawmaker this week said he wants medical marijuana for pets. A Nevada legislator on Tuesday proposed a bill in the legislature that would grant ailing pets legal access to medical marijuana. This bill was put forward by Democrat Tick Sigerblom, and it would let pet owners obtain cannabis for their animals if a veterinarian confirmed it may mitigate the symptoms or effects of a chronic or debilitating medical condition. Contrary to scare stories and misinformation in the mainstream press, and as we have learned on Toke signals, cannabis is non-toxic to pets, and in fact to all mammals. This bill also includes new rules for human patients, including regulations for medical marijuana dispensaries, and it drops penalties for motorists found driving with marijuana in their systems. Before we go this week, there is a must-read on tokesignals.com. If you've been following the situation, you know that things look quite grim for the medical marijuana community in Washington state this week. But you want to read this article. It's entitled, There's Still Hope for Medical Cannabis Patients in Washington State. It's by an activist named Kirk Ludden, and it contains some valuable information about an initiative that could enormously help patients here in Washington. Hope to see you again next week. Until then, stay lifted.